You are at an airport 2 days before Christmas. There are people everywhere. You have about 15 minutes to get to Terminal E, Gate 54, before your plane closes its doors, and you have to wait and see if you can find another flight that will get you and your family home back before the holidays. Your partner is irate because they're hungry. Both of you woke up before breakfast, or coffee was really a workable option. And now on top of that, your 5-year-old is throwing a full-blown fit just as you make it through security because you forgot to pack their favorite snack, gummy worms. How could you have been so thoughtless? Quick question. By show of hands, who can tell me what terminal you need to get to? How about the gate number? Okay, so that's way better than the average audience that I do this exercise with. What you're so supposed to say is, gummy worms? The point is this. Even though we should all agree that that terminal and gate is the most singularly important thing, it's hard to recall it because there's so much else going on, right? It's hard to pull out what is important. As climate advocates and technical professionals, we often approach talking about our solutions in very much the same way, overwhelming our audiences with too much unclear information, and it makes it challenging to know what you should and shouldn't be paying attention to or what you should be remembering. I ran into this directly about 2 years ago. I was unexpectedly and suddenly let go from my job. I was in the middle of trying to figure out what it meant to be a new dad of a 6-month-old, and I was at a loss. I couldn't even go and get comforted by my friends in person because it was the middle of the pandemic. I was really at a loss and I didn't know what to do next. My previous employer before my last job had also folded. This was a solar panel production company. But even though that option wasn't there anymore, I still wanted to explore that and see what it might look like to rejoin that space. So I did everything that I could to learn as much about the space and reconnect as quickly as possible. I learned about solar and wind and energy storage and hydrogen. I signed up for webinars and I listened to conference talks. I saw product pitches. I even got to see some companies pitch themselves to investors. It was really exciting. But very fast, I ran into a snag. I didn't understand the insider acronyms, or the way that the electrical grid worked, or any of a number of other technical niche items. Consistently, I could barely understand what the technology was, what it did, or why I should care. And I used to be an engineer. We need a better way of engaging people. Consistently, we are getting both the scale and the sequence of our messaging wrong. And as a result, we are losing opportunities and we are losing people. When I was trying to plug back into the renewable energy industry, I noticed essentially one of two things typically happens. Either we go too big, talking about global climate change and the atmosphere and 1.5 degrees Celsius and other global phenomena. It turns out the world's a really big place. It's very hard to intuitively connect with everything and everyone everywhere all at once. On the other side of the coin, we often are tempted to go too small or too abstract, talking about incremental efficiency gains or performance boosts or facts and features that maybe don't make sense yet because you don't quite understand what the product is already. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that climate tech is or needs to be sexy. Granted, this is a very self-selecting population of people that have come to talk and participate in a climate event or watching a recording of one now. So if you really get excited about high voltage electrical transmission lines, you do you. I am not here to yuck your yum. All I'm trying to say is that climate tech doesn't need to be sexy. It needs to be engaging. If it needs to be engaging, what does that look like? If we're simultaneously going both too big and too small, what's this warm porridge of getting people to connect and care? It's storytelling. Early on in my career, I had the opportunity to go to a conference where I saw two speakers during a session. One of them was on the population dynamics of starfish, just where do starfish like to live? The other speaker was going to talk about how to safely and environmentally get rid of VX nerve toxin, which, if you're not familiar, is the most powerful chemical weapon known to man. The first person got up and immediately shared a really fascinating anecdote about floating weightless in the water column while she was taking underwater pictures of the boulders and cobbles and sand where the starfish make their home and they traverse around. Immediately after that, she was explaining how she learned that starfish use these microscopic barbs to latch into rock surfaces, and shared this really fascinating scanning electron microscope picture of these harpoons blasting into rocks. She reiterated her key points and ended with a lot of enthusiasm. The second person, the chemical weapons expert, stood up and shared a couple chemical formula, and then read bullet point by bullet point, step by step, the chemical reaction that would lead to getting rid of this compound. When I walked out of that room thinking about starfish, I knew that something was wrong. I should have been thinking about the most powerful chemical weapon known to man. Stories are effective because they provide the appropriate human scale that's required to get people to lean in and care. So that when you finally include statistics and facts and figures and all this other stuff, it can stick to that already existing engagement and prop it up and support it effectively. In fact, the academics have taken a long, hard look at storytelling. It's no surprise that stories are super effective. We've been telling each other stories for hundreds of thousands of years. It wasn't until 150 years ago that the written word was actually accessible to most people. Studies focused on stories are really enlightening and kind of staggering. There's over 350 books that have been published, 1,700 qualitative and quantitative studies spanning 15 different scientific disciplines that all unanimously agree that stories are one, if not the most effective ways of engaging people, increasing recall, motivating, and inspiring people to act and change. Quick sidebar here, the fact that that is unanimous is out of this world. To put that in context, it took 75 years of intense conflict back and forth to decide whether umami was a flavor or not. So when I say that it's unanimously agreed how effective stories are for accomplishing these tasks, that is a wholesale outlier in science. Despite this mountain of evidence, business leaders and speakers often will still hesitate to include stories when they're speaking because they're afraid that they won't be taken seriously. Tech in particular is notorious for a bias against storytelling, seeing it as something that is childish or just fluff. But here's the thing. Stories take ordinary moments and turn them into extraordinary memories. Ask any investor which company pitch they most remember, and they're not going to tell you about a company that had stellar financials or a really attractive specific addressable market. They're going to tell you a story about a founder that created a neural net of electrodes that made it so that their niece never had to have crippling seizures ever again. Or they're going to tell you about an entrepreneur who started a microgrid company focused on equipping hospitals in Haiti with microgrids, so that if the power went out broadly, they would still be able to provide services to those most in need. The last project they finished was 2 weeks before a hurricane knocked out the power on the grid for 2 months. Now, there are industries that recognize the power of stories and are really capitalizing on them to spread their message. Unfortunately, many of those industries are the ones working feverishly against addressing the issues of climate change. Oil and gas in particular has outspent renewable energy advocates by more than 10 to 1. You want to combat this? Tell more stories. Despite having a majority of Americans believing in further developing wind and solar resources, and each one of those power generation capacities being cheaper than any other option readily available, we have not and will not win based purely on the facts. You need to tell more stories. The easiest way to do that? Collect them and create them. Collecting stories is super easy. Every week, you are awash in stories from entertainment, from your family members, from your coworkers. Anyone and everyone that you talk to is probably going to share some kind of story with you. The next time that you run into a story that really catches your attention, makes you laugh, makes you cry, sticks with you for some reason, write it down. Make this easy. Every one of your phones has a notes app. Start a folder called Stories and write down about 5 keywords that will help jog your memory. Do this one time, I promise it will pay off. For the Haiti example that I just gave. Haiti, microgrid, hospital, hurricane. Read that and you'll be able to tell it to anyone off the bat. If you already have stories that are working for you, make sure that they follow this basic format. SOS. Setup. What's the most relevant information that someone needs to know in order to appreciate your story? Make sure to make this as focused as possible, as it's really easy here to overwhelm people with context that's going to drown out your message. Second part, obstacle. What was the issue? What was getting in the way of people actually accomplishing what they were trying to do? And then lastly, solution. What did they do about that? Or, with hindsight being 20/20, maybe what should they have done about that obstacle? The next time that you have an opportunity to speak with someone that might not already be on board with your piece of the climate movement, stop and ask yourself, what would be a good story to share here? Stories are a beautiful thing because they forge connection and understanding. If you can better learn how to embrace the science of good communication, we will all have a better shot at creating the brighter and sustainable future we all want. Thank you.